In this Searching for History, we're going to talk a little bit about Newcastle upon Tyne.
Newcastle is in the north of England. And we lived in Newcastle when I was pursuing my master's degree in archaeology.
We have a lot of fond memories of Newcastle. It's a little bit like a second home for us.
Yeah, I would really like to go back. Come with us as we explore Newcastle and the surrounding area. To start off, we lived in student housing in a place called Lees's Terrace.
Lees's Terrace was where they had a lot of single dorms, and then they had like apartment-style dorms. Well, we lived in a dorm, and then we shared a kitchen with other students.
Yeah, and one thing about Lees's Terrace, originally it was a block of Georgian townhouses, and then the interior of the building had been gutted and then turned into student housing. We were living right here on the third floor, kind of behind that tree where that metal railing is located. So that's our two windows right there. And there's the inside of the room.
Yeah, I remember feeling like I needed to do a little bit of redecorating, so we had to do some sort of emergency, like figuring out where the local department store was and where to buy bedding and pictures for the wall and knickknacks and stuff like that. When you get into a dorm room, normally you want to make your room your house.
The room was probably twice as big as this studio we're sitting in.
Yeah.
This here is the view from our room, so looking out the window. This actual picture happened to be when it was snowing.
Yeah, I thought we had a really nice view out our window. It was just of other terraces.
Moving on to the university, most of my classes, the archaeology classes, were held in what was called the Armstrong building, and that's the building you see here. I really liked the architecture of the university. You know, it had some classical elements, and it was kind of red brick with ivy growing on it. I thought it was a really neat atmosphere. It was a pretty cool university. So walking from Lees's Terrace through the university is kind of was the main way to get into the city center. So you'd walk through the university, past the various buildings, and kind of the first thing you saw was a church, and that was the St. Thomas Church. It had a war memorial of a knight about to draw a sword. I liked that statue. That was fun to see.
Yeah, that church is really notable because it looks really dirty.
Yeah. Yeah, years of coal
Yeah.
burning, coal soot. The next thing you saw as you're walking into town towards what was called Northumberland Street was the Haymarket Metro Station, and then another memorial with an angel on the top that was actually the South African War Memorial. One thing about Newcastle is it had a subway system called the Metro. This is one of the stops you see here in this picture.
Yeah, the Metro made it really easy to get around town and just outside of town.
Yeah, the Metro ran multiple stops within the town, but then also it went on both sides of the Tyne River all the way out to Tynemouth, where the river entered the sea.
You could really utilize a lot of public transit all over that area.
So do you remember this street, Erin?
Yeah, Northumberland Street was a favorite to walk down. It has lots of great shops, but it's especially notable for me because I have lots of fond memories around the holidays. All of the shops had great Christmas displays.
Yeah, I remember specifically Phoenix had a really nice Christmas display in the windows as you walked by.
Yeah, Phoenix is a really
it's a high-end
high
department
street
store.
department store, yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much all the shopping that you would want to do was on Northumberland Street, which was also a pedestrian street. Oh, right there, I see a picture of Greg's. So what was Greg's, Erin?
Greg's it's like a little pastry shop, but like affordable.
Yeah. Like you get coffee there, chicken bakes,
Sausage rolls.
sausage rolls.
And you can get donuts.
Yeah, donuts.
But it's all very affordable.
Yeah. And also like you get your newspaper
You get
there.
your newspaper there. I kind of think of it as the equivalent of like a Dunkin' Donuts, but uniquely Northern English.
We loved Greg's, and there's pretty much like in Newcastle, you just walk a few blocks, there's another Greg's.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, that's probably one of the things we miss the most about living in England.
Yeah.
You walk down Northumberland Street, you hang a right, and that takes you over to the Gray's Monument, which is kind of the center of town and kind of the hub. Like the streets seem to go out from the Gray's Monument. And from the Gray's Monument is where you really start to see this incredible Georgian architecture. And just to talk about the monument really quickly, it's dedicated to Charles Grey, the second Earl Grey. Charles Grey was a British Whig politician who was prime minister from 1830 to 1834. Famous because he enacted the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, which abolished slavery in the British Empire, and was from Northumberland. But we loved walking down there around the monument, and it's just a really neat atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right around there, they also had a Christmas market that had all kinds of different stalls and, different kinds of food and drink and little knickknacks that you could buy.
It's kind of like the Newcastle version of a German Christmas market.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about your favorite place that's near the Gray's Monument?
Every week we would need to go grocery shopping, and so we would walk down all of the streets we just talked about to our regular grocery store. But as we walked through, we would go to a place called the Grainger Market. And the Grainger Market is a big, old-fashioned market.
Yeah, it's like a multiple business bazaar.
Yeah.
I think the buildings dates to the Georgian era.
Mm-hmm.
And you walk inside, and it's kind of like stall after stall of various merchants selling produce and baked goods, and
there was a good fishmonger there.
And there's a butcher.
Yeah.
So
we would get our Cumberland sausage there, and we could get high quality fish there, and if we wanted produce there, we could go there and get produce. But they had all different kinds of other shops there. You could get some clothes and different kinds of other things.
From the Gray's Monument, one of the streets that has really nice Georgian architecture to walk down is called Grey Street. Grey Street actually had, I think, was that called the Royal Theatre?
I don't remember I think it might have been called that, but it was a really nice, like
Georgian era
theater.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Where they had plays.
Yeah.
And other kinds of theatrical things.
So at the end of Grey Street, one of the first notable buildings you'd see down there was the Cathedral Church of St. Nicholas, or the Newcastle Cathedral, which dated to at some point in the medieval era. I'm not sure exactly which century, but it did have medieval origins. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a
church
nice church
on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So walking past the Newcastle Cathedral, you end up at another building which we spent quite a bit of time at, and that's the Castle Keep. So the Black Gate and the Castle Keep, this is the original castle of Newcastle.
Yeah, you actually did a surveying class where everyone surveyed that building.
So this keep actually dates to the late Norman era, and one of my classes I took, we actually were doing a survey of the building, kind of a historic property inventory type thing. That was actually pretty cool. Like there's a picture here where we put targets. We were in the Great Hall and we put targets on the wall took pictures of it, and then measured the distance between the targets so that I was able to pull that into the computer and rectify the photography based on the distances between the targets. And then at that point, then you could draw, each block of stone that's in the picture and get a pretty good survey of a wall by doing that. And we did that to the interior of the Great Hall. My memory of it is every year the next group of students that took that class did a different room, and so the goal was eventually they'd have the whole keep surveyed.
Yeah.
So I assume by now it's been surveyed, the whole thing.
Yeah. If you've surveyed that building, let us know.
Yeah, that'd be cool to know. But I loved it in there, and it has these awesome. If you're in Europe, or if you're on the continent outside of the British Isles, you would call this architectural style Romanesque. In the British Isles, it's called Norman, but the entrance had that the Romanesque archway, kind of with that zigzag pattern. It's pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, I love that style of architecture.
Yeah, it's getting more rare to find just because you typically see it in churches. But a lot of those Romanesque churches in Europe ended up with a Gothic and then a Baroque facelift. And so those original Romanesque elements were lost. Mm-hmm. So it's cool when you see that. I don't remember what that room was, but it had a fireplace in it. Here's the Great Hall. And then this was the roof of the keep.
Did that keep have a little museum in it, and they had artifacts that they uncovered?
It had a small museum in it. I'm not sure where the pieces or the items.
Maybe they were just from the Tyne Valley.
I don't think they were necessarily from
there.
Walking downhill from the keep brought you to another really nice part of Newcastle, which is called the Quayside.
Yeah, the Quayside is just along the river there.
Yeah, along the Tyne River.
Well, there's a lot of pubs along the Quayside, but there were another couple of pubs that our group of student friends liked to go to as well. There was a higher class pub that they all liked to go to. Mm-hmm. No, it was out of our price range.
Yeah, we're going to the more inexpensive pubs.
Yeah.
But then there's actually, down there on the Quayside, there's a street that it's called the Bessie Surtees House, and it was built in the 16th to 17th century in the Jacobean architectural style. And it's pretty cool. You can tour it. It's kind of a half-timbered style building. So it kind of stands out as something different amongst all this Georgian architecture to see. Most of the bridges, except the really high ones that cross the Tyne River in the middle of Newcastle, were drawbridges. And I think that one that's a pedestrian bridge was called the Millennium Bridge.
The Millennium Bridge? I think so, yeah.
I think so.
I think it's a interesting...
Well, it's the one that looks like a big arch.
Right.
And then the whole thing pivoted up
to
let boats through.
Yeah. It was a sort of interesting way to create a drawbridge rather than just the traditional,
right?
That opens.
But even that other one, I think traffic could go across this one. Mm-hmm. It didn't open either. It pivots. The whole thing pivoted,
right.
From the center.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of interesting bridge architecture in Newcastle, apparently.
And so then walking back uphill from the river, you get to the train station. And Newcastle has a really big, nice train station. We took journeys from the train station to Durham a couple different times, up the Tyne Valley to Hexham and other places. And then we also took it up the coast to Berwick-upon-Tweed and Edinburgh and different places like that.
Yeah, taking the train is a great way to travel around that part of England.
It is.
Scotland.
This is the Irish pub on the other side of the street from the train station.
Right, yeah.
And look, there's another Greg's just right on the other side of the street there.
Yeah.
And then the nicest hotel in town was the Thistle.
Yeah, the Thistle.
So we're walking back uphill towards Lisa's Terrace, and you come across the Cathedral Church of St. Mary. It's not that old of a church. It was built between 1842 and 1844, but it's actually really beautiful, and it was built in a Gothic style.
Yeah, I really like that church.
Yeah, and the inside in the nave has big Gothic arches, and it was really nice. So Newcastle being a medieval town, so you're always kind of, at least for me, I'm looking for little elements that, that prove that it was from that era. And it actually does still have a small stretch of its original wall. So there is a stretch of the medieval wall with a couple of towers kind of near the Chinatown.
Mm-hmm. In fact, whenever we would go to get to our favorite Chinese restaurant, we would make sure to kind of like walk around the long way to check out the wall.
We didn't really have that many pictures of Chinatown, but we did have one. And then our favorite place to go was a place called China Express.
Yeah.
And you can see it right here on this Google Street View. It's still there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It had the best beef and spring onion you could ever find.
Yeah.
It was really good.
If you're in Newcastle and the China Express still exists, go there because it's really good.
Yeah. So we're kind of winding down the sites that to talk about in Newcastle, but one of them, not far from Chinatown, and was the Blackfriars Medieval Friary. I remember going there a couple of times, but I don't really remember. Did we tour the inside of it? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
I don't have any pictures of the inside, just the outside.
We did tour it. They won't let you take pictures on the inside, and that's why we don't have any pictures.
Okay.
That's why we only have pictures of the outside.
It's a neat little spot of, medieval architecture in the middle of a city. The Blackfriars Friary dates to the 13th century. And don't ask me the difference between a friary and a priory. I have no idea.
If you know the difference, please let us know.
Yeah, let us know in the comments below. We talked about how you could take the metro out towards Tynemouth. We did go out there a couple of times, and it's a small town. But what's interesting is the train station out there has a Victorian feel to it. And while, at least in 2010, Tynemouth seemed kind of a slow-paced town, you could tell that at one time it was the seaside destination for Newcastle.
Yeah.
And so the train station was extra fancy for that era.
Yeah, very beautiful, really. I think something that characterizes seaside towns all over England is that their train stations were very beautiful. Even if they were small, going to the seaside was a way for more regular people to have the kind of slice of aristocratic experience that they had never had before.
Tynemouth has kind of one main attraction, at least in my opinion, and that's the Tynemouth Priory and Castle. And then also right next to the Tynemouth Priory and Castle is a World War II era coastal battery. The Priory and Castle is really like why we would go out to Tynemouth. Mm-hmm. It's perched right on the edge of a cliff, looking over the sea. It's definitely in a ruined state. It's a neat ruin to go check out.
Yeah, I think if you're in Newcastle, you should take the time to go see Tynemouth and that castle and priory.
So actually this castle and priory, it's old enough that it has some of the Norman elements to it. So there's some cool architectural elements left within the ruin itself. And then there's also a really interesting, I don't know if that was a chapel.
It was a chapel.
Yeah, so there's a chapel that you can kind of go down some stairs into that's kind of an intact space. And then there's a graveyard right next to the priory. If you're ever there to visit the castle and priory at Tynemouth, like take your time to walk through and look at all the different gravestones. Some of them have some really cool imagery on them. Other ones have been so eroded by the elements, I think being that close to salt water and the storms that come through and probably the type of stone that they were made from, that they're quite eroded, almost like you can see they're just dissolving away.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of pitting and discoloration.
In fact, most of them we couldn't even read anymore.
No.
You see a lot of skulls and kind of darker imagery on these gravestones. And then right next to that is an artillery battery. I'm assuming it's World War II era. And then, of course, you can go down inside the magazine and we have a picture of Erin, telling us how everything worked.
Yep, I knew how everything worked after just one visit.
So apparently Erin is a World War II battery expert. But actually, we've gotten pretty good at learning about at least the ones here in Washington State.
Yeah, I think so.
The other place you can access from the metro, and it's on the other side of the Tyne River, is a place called Jarrow. And we went there a couple of times. Jarrow has kind of two main attractions. One is, it's called Jarrow Hall, the Anglo-Saxon Farm, Village, and Bead Museum. When we went there, it was called Beads World.
Yeah.
But they've changed the name since then. And then near there is the St. Paul's Monastery.
Both are actually really great sites to visit. I remember the monastery was really awesome.
So the Venerable Bede is an early saint and a Saxon, and so that's why they called it Bede's World, because they're trying to recreate that era.
Yes. It's an excellent place to visit. It's
an open air folk museum is what it is. But they have various buildings, reconstructions of Saxon era buildings to show you the Saxon way of life.
Yeah.
And then the monastery is actually pretty cool because part of it itself dates back to the Saxon era.
Yeah.
That's quite old. Yeah, the eastern end of the church that's still there dates to the 7th century. So, the 600s. You don't see a lot of buildings, that are that old.
Really old.
It's called the Monkwearmouth Jarrow Abbey. And the Venerable Bede spent most of his life at this monastery. You can actually go in there and be in a space that the Venerable Bede existed in.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
The rest of the church that's there is from the 15th century. But inside, on the ends of the pews, have these really awesome wood carvings. I don't know if they date to the Anglo-Saxon era. They probably don't, because that seems like a long time for wood to survive. But they definitely have a medieval look to them.
Yeah, I think
they're pretty cool.
The reason we went to this building is to look at the medieval fabric on the wall on the outside, and so medieval fabric is a reference to the stonework. Yeah, and so I believe that one of your professors pointed out that the oldest part of that monastery was some sections of the wall. Mm-hmm. And so I don't believe that the faces were the oldest, were contemporary to the oldest sections.
It was this wing of the building, the eastern end.
Right.
It's called the chancel.
Yeah.
Those were the highlights of Newcastle and where you can get to on the metro, at least the highlights for us from people that love history and archaeology. One thing I've noticed about Newcastle is it's kind of left out of the tourist books. Like if you get a Rick Steves book to visit the north of England, he'll tell you to go to Durham and Hexham and up the Tyne Valley. It kind of just skips over Newcastle upon Tyne, and I think that's a shame because it's actually a pretty cool town.
Yeah, it's a cool town.
So, if you're going to go to the north of England, don't overlook Newcastle upon Tyne. There is enough to see there that do 2 nights in a day or something like that.
Yeah.
We hope to go back, and we're going to spend a couple days there again.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, while Newcastle is a small city, I think trying to travel in it using a car would be uncomfortable. So I do think
it's quite congested. I wouldn't drive around
using public transit in it is much better.
I know a couple of times we rented a car, but we took the metro out to the airport, the Newcastle airport, and picked up our car there, and then did a day trip in the car out into the countryside, and then dropped it back off at the airport and took the metro back into town.
That made things much easier for us.
Anyhow, that's our video on Newcastle upon Tyne. I hope you guys liked it.
Don't forget to like, share, comment on this video, and please subscribe to Searching for History.
Thanks for watching.